All right, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. We're incredibly excited to have you with us today for our fifth session of our Future MDs in STEM summer program. We're also very excited because our special guest speaker is here today, and she's going to be talking to us about her journey in medicine and pathway into healthcare and some tips and advice that she has. So again, if you have any questions for her, you're more than welcome to raise your hand or ask her any questions in the chat, but we'll let her go ahead and get started and introduce herself, and then we'll open up time for some questions at the end.
All right, hello everyone. So good to be here. Let me know if the full screen works, because I know sometimes, do you see a full screen now or still the regular PowerPoint?
I think the regular PowerPoint.
All right, let's try this. Share again. How about now?
Yes, now it's good.
Okay, beautiful. All right, it's so wonderful being here. I'm Gopika. I am an MD PhD student at the Medical College of Wisconsin. I am starting my fourth year now. And throughout this talk, I thought I would talk a little bit more about my journey through MD PhD, how I got there, potential tips and tricks for anyone else that are interested in the MD PhD path. But that being said, if you're interested in just the PhD or just the MD and you have questions about that, I'm more than happy to answer. And I'm a pretty informal person, so just, raise your hand or unmute and talk, and I'm hoping it'll be more of a conversation than me just talking at you this morning. All right, let's see. Okay, so I thought this picture was really funny because I know a lot of you probably heard from Matthias last week. So if you see, we kept the slides similar. We're both co-directors of F1 Doctors for any international students participating and interested in one-on-one mentors. But I love the wide awake hat because that's kind of the joke with medical students. But I wanted to put this in here to talk about the fact that in medicine, we always talk about, oh, you're doing medicine, you don't have a lot of time. But I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about the fun things that I do to get you thinking about the fact that medicine is an entire lifestyle. You get to do a lot of fun stuff. And then the right here is a picture actually from my recent trip to Florida with my undergrad friends. And medicine in general has been a very fun and exciting journey. And I'm hoping that as I talk through this and I tell you a little bit more about intimidating things about, how to apply, how to do MD PhD, things that you should consider, that you keep in the back of your mind, that once you get into medical school, people want you to be there. It's a wonderful time. You will have time for life. And I hope you consider this. I hope you consider MD PhD without being too intimidated by all that it has to offer. But just a little bit more background about my journey. I was born in India. I moved to the US, to Delaware actually, in 6th grade. And then from there, I moved around quite a bit just because we moved here during the recession and there was a lot of job volatility in the family. So we moved around almost every year all through middle school and high school. And I did most of my high school in Boston, Massachusetts. From there, I moved to Wisconsin for like the last year, year and a half of my high school, and then ended up staying here for both my undergrad and my MD PhD path. I thought I would talk a little bit about how I chose my undergrad as well. For me, when I was applying, I was actually a pretty confused high schooler. I loved law. I loved science. I loved architecture and drawing. So I feel like I had a lot of different interests. So when I applied, And I was the first student from my family or close friends that was applying to college in the US. So I kind of applied broadly into all three of those fields, and then waited for scholarships to roll in. And then I made a more financial choice when it came to picking biomedical engineering. And I loved science. After I went to the program, I figured out it was the right fit for me. And I loved everything that it had to offer. Um, but I hope I can convey to you that regardless of the journey that you came through, or when I was applying biomedical engineering, I didn't have medicine in my mind exactly. So you can change your mind and kind of pick medicine at any point. And I thought I would start with how I kind of ended up at that medicine part from there. So when I started in biomedical engineering, I remember on my first day, a few of the admissions counselors that were there helping us sign up for classes said, "Hey, there's an undergraduate research scholars program. Why don't you sign up? Like, it's a great way to get exposure to research." And I was like, "Cool." I didn't know it existed, so I signed up and happened to be in a research lab that first year. But other than that research experience, a lot of my activities during undergrad was actually focused on product design, innovation, and entrepreneurship. So I was very involved in the entrepreneur learning community. I started a student inventors club, and I thought I was going to be like the next bionics designing person. That was my dream in undergrad. And but and some of the other fun things I did was taekwondo, swing dancing. If anyone has never tried swing dancing, it's super fun. Recommend it. And I worked at the makerspace. So again, all very geared towards engineering and then my fun activities. But that first year of research, I actually really liked the research component of it, and I found myself enjoying the biology side of my engineering degree more so than just the hardcore um, math or the electrical design. I liked all of it, but I think I preferred the biology and the human body a little more. So from there, I switched over to a research lab that happened to be run by an MD PhD PI. And he was kind of my source of inspiration for even considering MD PhD as a degree. I got to work in the lab and do some of the basic science work that he had going on. And then I would shadow him in the clinics and look at the clinical trials that he could design and how he was taking the results that we were seeing in the lab and directly translating them clinically. So I think that was my main initial spark to even start thinking about, oh, maybe I could do medical school. And I'll talk more about, what MD PhD entails. But the main component there was I could do medical school and treat patients, but I could also have the creative aspects that drew me to biomedical engineering and that made me like engineering through the PhD aspect. So I wasn't giving up any aspect of school and life that I really enjoyed in picking MD PhD. And that was my ultimate decision into applying. And I didn't fully decide on MD PhD until end of sophomore year. So, and then I kind of scrambled into saying, okay, I need to take my MCAT. So at the end of my second year, I started preparing for the MCAT, and halfway through in January, so during winter break was my intense MCAT studying. I took my MCAT, and then that spring I submitted my applications for MD PhD. I'm happy to talk more about the pros and cons of doing it that way, gap years and things like that towards the end of the presentation. But that was the timeline that at that time seemed to fit me the best. And I also want to point out that one of the main reasons I didn't take a gap year was because since my degree was in biomedical engineering, my understanding was that my OPT will have to be in a biomedical engineering related field, but I didn't want to continue in the engineering world as much anymore. So for me, it just felt more right to just say, I'm just going to apply and hope I get in, rather than try to do a biomedical engineering master's or an engineering research or something to keep my OPT alive for the gap year. And then when I was thinking about MD PhD training, I'll talk more about my application itself and how to do that in the future slides. But I want to highlight now is that my involvements now are still very much an outgrowth of the things that I loved in undergrad. And this becomes really important as you start thinking about your application when you're applying. So in undergrad, I did do a lot of product design and entrepreneurship work. And I still do a lot of that now, but from the landscape of how it applies directly to patient care, how it applies to public health. And so a lot of that, those skills are still something that I apply. And my research interest grew into obviously the PhD project that I'm doing, but I think it also gives us a leg up in doing the clinical research component because you already come in with experience knowing how to come up with a hypothesis, how to answer a hypothesis, how to write well, how to put together a presentation. And then but what I didn't mention was I was pretty involved with tutoring in undergrad. And now that kind of evolved into working with pipeline programs and education programs to give back to the community. And then the last components of it are things that I think are more specific and exciting about the MD PhD part, where I'm involved in national scientific societies, which is something that MD PhD, when you think about the career itself, we're groomed to be leaders. That's part of what we take on as part of our training. So I'm involved in those. And then, of course, I love mentoring students, especially through F1 doctors. So the main reason I mention these is I want you to kind of see how a lot of my involvements now are an outgrowth of what I did in undergrad. So in my application, I said, you know what, here are my skills. Here's what I did with product design and innovation. And here's how I'm going to apply this in medicine. And I want you to truly mean it. And you can tell when people mean it because they come into medical school and apply that, right? And you can say, I loved tutoring. I loved working with students. And you can really expand upon that during your graduate program. So as you think about writing your application, I want you to reflect on the parts of your current life that you think you'd want to carry forward that makes you uniquely equipped or skilled to bring into medicine in a way that other people might not always be able to. And then put that in your application. Tell them how you're going to take what you're currently doing and grow it as part of your medical education. And with that being said, here's how I personally thought about my application itself, right? I said, I'm a biomedical engineer with a lot of experience in innovation, product design, and a little bit of business skills as well from my entrepreneurial endeavors. And then with that being said, what that really enabled me to do is problem solve. And it gave me the skills to think creatively. It gave me those skills to take a problem and actually come up with solutions beyond just what someone without an engineering training would be able to, right? So that's the engineering part of my story. And then the next part of the story that I really wanted to convey was that I enjoyed my lab experience. So I loved research. And I really made a point to connect the fact that I loved research because, again, it connected to the creative thinking and problem solving aspects that I loved about engineering. So me being a good engineer fed into my research. So now we're starting to paint a cohesive picture. And then the last part was conveying to them that I really wanted to do the MD part, which is, from the clinical shadowing, volunteering experiences, things that sparked my interest when I was interacting with patients, and how that was well suited for my skills and strengths and how I would be a good physician. And in order for me to balance all of these, it made most sense for me to do an MD PhD training. So my whole goal with walking you through this exercise is I'm hoping that I can show you that going from, here are my experiences to here's what I do now, this is how I actually put that into my application to say, here is how my background and my skills will make me a competitive and a successful MD PhD candidate. Going forward, I was going to talk a little bit more about the MD PhD training application and more tips and tricks, but I want to stop here to see if you guys have any questions, especially when it comes to framing your story and coming up with here's what I do now and here's what I'm going to do for the MD part, because I think that's probably the most important part of applying to any program, especially MD PhD. I'll do the awkward 7-second wait. Okay. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat as well. Okay. So I've been talking a lot about the MD PhD training and how I got there, but do you have any recommendations? Okay. So shadowing opportunities. A lot of times, honestly, it's cold emailing, and depending on your location, you could even say, you know what, let me shadow, even if it's your PCP, not the worst idea. I would just honestly cold email as many people as you physically can, and then see what works out. That's what I did when I was applying or when I was looking for shadowing opportunities. It is a little time consuming and cumbersome, but that would be one recommendation. The other thing is academic hospitals usually have more opportunities for shadowing. So if you're close to any academic centers that have a medical school attached, they're usually more open to shadowing because they also have residents that can take you on. So I would try and reach out to professors that you find on academic hospital websites. Sorry, I can't see the chat anymore. There it is. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So going forward, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what MD PhD actually is and who should maybe consider applying. And please feel free to interrupt and ask any questions that you may have. It keeps going. So MD PhD, I actually love this quote that I found online. We're true chimeras who blend the clinical medicine with the discovery and application of new knowledge. So in the sense that we're really groomed to say, here is a clinical problem, and here's what the science has shown so far. Now, how do I take things from animal models and everything else in the world and say, how can I bring that directly to my patients? How do I bridge that component? And it's also going backwards, right? We say, here's a clinical problem, but then there is no science right now. How do I design experiments to figure out why we're seeing this clinical problems? So it's a full circle of thinking where we're constantly saying, let's bring science to medicine, and then let's inform scientists of things that we haven't considered yet, but they are a critical need in the medical world. MD PhD programs can vary in their structure and their timeline, but most have this breakdown where the first 2 years are your medical core curriculum, we call it. So you take classes, some have some integrated clinical time there as well. So it's mostly just classes for the first year or two, depending on the program that you go to. And then in between those years, you have research rotations put in. So at MCW, we do 4 rotations. So that means you spend some time in different labs that you're interested in to figure out if that's something you want to join. So we did 2 4-week rotations before M1 year, so before the first year of medical school. And then we did 2 4-week rotations between the first and second years. So it gives us an opportunity to explore 4 different labs to see if any of those would be a good fit for our PhD training. If you are seriously considering applying to MD PhD, I think that's definitely something that you want to look into about programs. How many rotations do they allow you to have? Do they have built-in time during the year for you to explore labs? So our program has Thursday evenings off for students. So Thursday afternoons are basically time for us to figure out different labs we can meet with or go explore other labs that we can go sit in at lab meeting during and things like that. So that we can explore labs to the best of our ability before choosing to do a rotation there. And then the PhD training itself can be anywhere between 3 to 4 years. Most programs and I think the traditional route is to do a 4-year PhD, but depending on the program, you might be able to do it sooner, or if you need to take more time for some reason, you can also do a 5-year PhD. So that's the blue part. And the one thing that's not here is usually after the first year, or after the second year, you take step 1 around this yellow bar. I don't know if you can see my pointer. Can you see my pointer? No? Okay. Let's see.
Yes, we can.
You can. Okay, perfect. And then after you take step 1, that's the first board exam you take. After your first year of graduate school, most programs also have a qualifying exam. So that's another thing that I didn't fully comprehend until I started the PhD part, and might be an important consideration for the program you're choosing as well. So when you rotate in different labs, it's kind of like undergrad, where we have a Department of Biomedical Engineering, Department of Science, Department of Immunology, Department of Pharmacology. We have the same exact structure within grad schools, and depending on the professor you pick, that's what your PhD will be in. So I will be getting a PhD in physiology, but I didn't choose the physiology part. I honestly just wanted the professor that I worked with, right? But I'm happy, I love physiology, so I'm happy for my PhD to be in that department. Along with that, your department also has different rules for what your qualifying exam will look like. Some have like the 2 days of written exam. Some have, for me, it was an oral exam. So I had to do a presentation and then questions following. If that is something that's an important consideration for you, I would look into that early on as you're considering which PIs to rotate with, and look at those graduate school requirements as you pick your labs as well. So that's usually the qualifying exam is after year 3. And then after we finish years 4, 5, or 6, depending on how long you take for your PhD, we go back into clinical rotations. One of the main things that successful MD PhD programs tend to incorporate is clinical exposure time during your graduate school program. So for us, we have about 50 hours required per year of clinical exposure or clinical involvement. So that's shadowing or going volunteering at free clinics, so that we don't totally let go of the medical side And we also in the last year have a program where we talk about different diagnoses and differential diagnoses and how to work through that. So we have an opportunity to maintain our clinical skills before we go back to our clinical rotations in the last 2 years. So as you consider programs, that's another important part of their curriculum that you want to look at. I see something in the chat. What do you suggest undergraduate medical students outside the do in the 6 years of studying? Fascinating. Can you tell me more about your question? So if they are interested in MD, PhD, but it's not offered in their country, so are you hoping to kind of design your own MD, PhD path in a home country? So study outside the US, is that my understanding? So I can't pronounce your name. Favor? I don't want to. Yes, that's what I'm. Okay. So I honestly don't have the expertise to know how you can design your own MD, PhD-esque path outside of the US. I'm sure it's a very country specific thing, depending on the home country, depending on what they offer, and depending on the amount of support they have for research. So in the United States, we have the NIH, and then we have all of these societies. So I'm funded by the American Heart Association. There's a whole host of other funding societies like American Cancer Society and things like that. So we have a lot of funding to be able to have robust MD PhD programs and to fund these PhD candidates both during and after training. So I think if you want to create your own MD PhD path, or pursue an MD and then do a PhD and then have a traditional career that we have in the US, which is after you graduate, you go into residency, and then after residency here, we have the option to say, I want to do 50% of my time as research, 50% clinical. I want to do 80% research, 20% clinical. So you can kind of, depending on grants, divide up some protected time. That's dependent on funding. So as you think about this career and think about whether you want to pursue that, I would think about how well suited your environment is for being able to maintain that type of an environment or to have that type of a career there. And then for the BA MD programs, honestly, if you are able to do a BA MD program, I absolutely go for it. And if you are set on doing an MD program right out of high school, I think it's a great opportunity to do that. But I will say with the BA MD program, now I'm not sure what the path is like if you wanted to switch into an MD PhD program. A lot of MD programs do have the opportunity for first year students to apply into their MD PhD program. So they're called internal applicants. So even after going into a purely MD program, you can switch over. If you're interested in MD PhD at all, I would just make sure that the program you're going to has the opportunity for you to switch over to MD PhD if you want to. If not, there's absolutely no harm in doing the BA MD program. The second consideration, a lot of schools in general don't have scholarships for international students to begin with. So I guess for international students, it doesn't totally make a difference whether we do BA MD or otherwise. But I did have a lot of scholarships for the undergrad component of my training. So most of my undergraduate training was funded, and I'm not sure they offer that for BA MD students. So if you're thinking about the financial decisions behind both funding undergrad and then funding medical school, and if that's of concern, I would just check and make sure that you're eligible for scholarships during your Bachelor's of Science or Bachelor's of Arts training, even if you go through this special program. So that's something that you probably want to consider before you decide. Awesome. Okay, so I think one of the most commonly asked questions I get is who should do MD PhD and who should not do MD PhD? Is MD PhD right for me? And I think reflecting back, one of the main things that you need to be sure of is that you cannot imagine a career without research, especially when you're interviewing. So the MD PhD interviews work slightly differently, where most MD interviews, you fly out for a day and they have like a day of, admissions, people to come talk to you, and then you have a tour of the campus, and then usually at least 2 interviews, one with the student, one with the faculty, sometimes more. And that's like your typical MD interview day. For an MD PhD, If they're an MSTP program, which is probably an important distinction I should tell you about, there's about 40 to 42 programs in the country that have an MSTP, medical scientist training program designation. That means they have at least some of their spots funded by the NIH, and they offer for all students complete tuition coverage for all 8 years, the same stipend for all 8 years, and then they cover like health insurance and then a minimal life insurance and disability insurance. So that's kind of the package that you get with an MSTP program. And usually they are the more well-established and integrated program because you need to have a good curriculum in place for the NIH to want to fund those programs. There are MD PhD programs you can apply to that do not have the MSTP distinction, but those programs may still offer you the same package of financial stuff, but they also might not. So if you're applying a non-MSTP program, you want to make sure that you're okay with the financial package, with the type of support, with the type of integration they have. So you know how I told you that I have mandatory clinical hours? They don't really have the infrastructure in place usually to do that. So just make sure they have enough support to make you feel like you want to go to that program if they're non-MSTP. So with that being said, if you want to do MD PhD, the interview process is they'll have you over. Usually the MSTP programs will fly you out and you have a day of medical school interviews and usually a day of meeting with a whole bunch of research professors. So I think at most places I met with at least 5 different research professors that are all interviewing you and grilling you on the research component. And what they're trying to get at is how much do you love and enjoy the research part? And then this last part where have you had enough experience to understand if you can successfully do a PhD, right? A PhD, you suddenly go from undergrad to a PhD and are expected to design your own experiments. You are expected to write the first draft of your manuscripts. You are expected to present at national conferences, mentor students. So there's a lot of different aspects of a PhD that you don't always get trained for. And then, of course, your experiments might not work out. Your ideas might not work out. You have to troubleshoot and work through those challenges and still graduate in time. So what we're trying to get at is, have you had enough research experience to say, yes, I understand the challenges of research. Yes, I understand the frustrating aspects of research. Yes, I understand, that there are skills that I need, like writing and presentations, and I've had those. And having all of those experiences, I know that I want to do this. So you have to convince them that you can really do a successful PhD. And then the middle part is you want to be able to convey that you have a vision for how you want to integrate research with clinical care, right? So it's not just that you love research, you love clinics, it's that you love the idea of having a career where both of those are integrated. It doesn't have to be like a super flushed out thing, right? You can say, in the past, I've done cancer research, and I can really see myself being the type of physician that can treat patients, take their unique tumors, create animal models to study them, and then figure out what treatments work and bring them back to patient care. So that's one potential avenue that I can see my career growing based on the current experiences I've had. But I'm sure in medical school, I'll learn more, or I'll have more research experience to talk more intensely about how exactly I want that career to look. But you just want to have some vision of how you can picture your career having both integrated. Awesome. And then for the who should not do a PhD, and I think this is something that, especially for international students, I really understand the financial incentives for wanting to do an MD PhD. Medical school is incredibly expensive, and we don't always get the same loan opportunities as international students. So I 100% understand the financial incentive to do an MD PhD. This is the unpopular opinion. I think if that is your only incentive, it's really difficult to get through the program. But if you love research enough and can see a career where it's integrated, even if you're not like 100% passionate about it, I understand if you're like, you know what, the financial incentive combined with the fact that I'm good at research and I love research and I can do a successful PhD might be an okay reason for you to do it, right? Obviously, you don't want to tell your admissions people that, but I do want to have you be cautious about doing it for the financial incentive part, because it is a very tiring program and the PhD is more challenging than doing like an undergraduate research, right? You're expected to do more and you're expected to come up with a project and complete it. So unless you feel like you have the skills and the passion to do that part, I would think very deeply about financial incentives being the only reason for doing this. And then the other component is there's plenty of people that can do um, clinical research without getting a PhD. You do not need a PhD to do clinical research. A PhD is usually for a more specific area of research or more mechanistic basic science research, we call it. So if you're like, I love research, but I'm happy with just clinical research, there's really no need to add on those 3 years or 4 years to do a PhD. So that's something else for you to think about too. In the chat, do I know of any private scholarships international students can apply for? Unfortunately, not that we know of, and that is something that we're hoping to work through with F1 doctors, is trying to see if we can start a scholarship fund for international students. But it is challenging, and I honestly don't know of any scholarship funds for international students, especially for the medical school part of the training. But that being said, for the undergraduate part of your schooling, there's plenty of scholarships that usually accept international students. In Wisconsin, there was a bunch of society scholarships through the university that I applied for. All of those did not care that I was an international student. The Wisconsin Alumni Association gave me some money and did not care that I was an international student. So I think the scholarships part is more straightforward for your undergraduate education. And honestly, if you can get most of that covered, please do. But for the medical program, I don't know of any. I would caution against saying that, if there are no scholarships, that it might be hopeless for international students, because especially with F1 doctors, I highly encourage you to reach out to a lot of our mentors. I think the popular opinion is most people feel it's worth it to take out those loans to fund your medical education and go through it anyway. So I don't think you should completely lose faith in medical education and going through medicine because of the scholarship component of it. I think there's plenty that medicine offers, and you will make great money after you graduate to be able to pay off those loans. And if that's a real concern, you can meet with a financial advisor to really plan out what that would look like. But I don't think you should necessarily rely or turn down medicine as an opportunity because of finances. I think plenty of us do it and it works out. If you want to reach out to F1 mentors, please just go on our website, and then you can look through all of our different mentors. And if anyone speaks to you more because of their story or where they're from, or what institution they're at now, and you're interested, just shoot them an email. We just ask that you be as detailed and specific as possible about what you're hoping for from those mentors, because they are all volunteers on our site. So just say, here's the exact type of help that I'm looking for. Can you help me with X, Y, and Z? Here's my background. Yeah. Awesome. So, having gone through the program and starting my 4th year now, I thought I'd give you a little bit more insider perspectives on things that you can expect to love during an MD PhD training, and then what the real challenges are. And I hope it helps you make a more informed decision about whether you want to do this career. So I alluded to this before, but the creativity is really what drew me to the PhD part. Medicine can be we call it evidence-based medicine, right? So we have research that looks at, what works in what patient population, what level of drugs should we give, what type of drug should we do. And it's almost like a flow chart that you're following for most patients. So medicine can be very algorithmic sometimes, but the PhD allows you to use more of that PhD brain. Or the creative brain, and I love that aspect. I love mentoring students and working with students. So that's another exciting avenue that I think the PhD gives me more time to do. I love traveling, and I love traveling with a purpose too, where most of my vacations are just add-ons to conferences, which makes me feel great because you did something productive and then you get some fun out of it. But traveling for conferences is some of my favorite things to do. You get to meet like-minded people throughout the country, make new friends, and I absolutely love that part of training. And as MD PhDs, you will go to at least 2 conferences a year, and you want to pick a PI that will let you go to at least 2 conferences a year. The writing part, and I think this is something that if you don't love, an MD PhD training can be really difficult. I love writing, and I think my writing has significantly improved during the MD PhD training. But one of the main things we do is write grants. We write manuscripts. And if you can kind of get into the creative and exciting aspects of those, it's a very rewarding part of doing an MD PhD training. And then some of the more softer sides, you do get a more flexible schedule during your PhD years. I greatly appreciate that in my mid 20s to just have some time that's not as regimented as medical school and residency. I absolutely love my classmates, and the MD PhD community is more tight knit, right? So there's about, I think we have 50 or 60 total students in the MD PhD program spanning all years at MCW. So we all get to know each other pretty well. We see each other often, and you have a more tighter knit community within the class. And then the last part, you do get to be more involved in national societies. You have the time for it. And in general, I think societies also look favorably upon students doing an MD PhD. So I'm involved with the Association of Women Surgeons as well as the American Physiology Society. And if that's something that's of interest to you, I'm happy to talk more about that as well. But I think that's a very exciting way to stay connected to the global scientific community. And then the main challenging parts of MD PhD is the bureaucracy involved with academia. And evidently, being in an academic setting, you do have to abide by the hierarchy of things. There are bureaucratic policies that limit what you can and cannot do within your PhD. The money that gets funded for your research is what you can really study. There's usually there are opportunities for you to do some side projects, but your PhD project usually has to be the one that you can get funded. So you might be more limited in the science that you can do. A lot of times when you get reviews back from a paper, you're doing experiments that you might not love, but because a reviewer asked for it, right? So there's just some academia related challenges that you just have to accept and go with. And then the other aspect that I think everyone inevitably will end up facing is the competition with colleagues, especially with even the medical school now going pass fail for step one. There's a lot of interest in publications and things like that. So you will see that there's a little bit more competition for authorship. And the best thing you can do for that is to have a conversation about that before you start a project, right? Saying, here's the project that we're starting, here's what we're doing. This person's going to take lead, they'll be first author. This person will do a little bit more work, they'll be second author, so on and so forth. For international students specifically, as you consider the topic of your study, note that the grants that we can apply for are limited, right? I could not apply for the NIH training grant, but then grants are kind of like the experience world where the first job you ask for says, oh, you need to have 2 years of experience. But if no one gives you that first job, you can't have that 2 years of experience. Grants are the same way. People who have grants before are looked more favorably upon for future grants. So when you're in your graduate school program, you want to try to get your own fellowship approved. But again, that's limited. And part of why I stuck more with heart research. One, I loved the heart in general. But American Heart Association also has fellowships that does not care if you're international or not. So that's something for you to keep in mind. And then I'm sure a lot of people, and I think one of the most daunting things about MD PhD is the timeline. We are here for a long time. And then the constant change. You go from medical school, when you finally feel like you know enough to go to clinics, you stop and go to your PhD, start over. And then when you finally feel like you're expert in your research, you stop and go back to clinics where you know less than your colleagues. Then you go into residency, but step away for research here. So I think one of the things that really is important for an MD PhD career is to just be versatile and adaptable and say, you know what, there are times when I will be the stupidest person in the room, and that's okay. You are adaptable, you're a good learner. That's why you're doing an MD PhD. But it's definitely psychologically one of the more challenging things that I've had to deal with. And the final challenging part is the mentor you pick. And I can't emphasize the importance of picking a good mentor enough, not even just for your PhD part, but even for your undergrad part, right? You pick a good mentor, they'll give you opportunities to do more independent research. They give you more of those opportunities, you can publish research. So I think the mentor you pick really drives your career. So feel free to switch mentors if things are not working out for you, but that's an incredibly important aspect. Are there research programs for international students in the US, Canada? Look up the American Heart Association SURE program. I think that one accepts international students. Medical College of Wisconsin has an SPUR, Summer Program for Undergraduate Research, where we can take on international students. And then there's I only know about MCW programs. MCW also has a PURE program for undergraduate undergraduate research experience. Also a good one for you to consider. Yeah. So for the rest of the time, I know it's around we're getting towards the end of the time. I put together some tips that I was actually hoping to more so send out to you. And this is the final slide I'll talk about, where when you're considering applying for an MD PhD, you want to think about this holistic review that AAMC put together. So main things we care about when you talk about productive research, publications, right? And presentations. So as you think about what you're doing during your undergrad, you want to pick a mentor that will allow you to do meaningful research, aka you will have opportunities to contribute intellectually to the research. So you're on publications. You can go present a poster somewhere, you can go present or give a talk somewhere. And then the integrity and maturity part is an important component of interviews, right? So through your volunteering or social awareness, you really want to convey that you understand social issues that affect medicine, and you want to have a good, mature answer for why you want to do medicine. And then the physician scientist career commitment is another important one. And that can be as simple as I have a career mentor who's a physician scientist, right? Or you can say, I've been in contact with a physician scientist and I've been learning the ins and outs of their career. So you can frame that however best fits your experiences, but that's an important component of being able to convey that you understand what it's like to be a physician scientist. And then the last components here is the caring for others components. And this is where anytime you shadow, anytime you volunteer, write down every single patient experience that resonated with you, why it resonated with you, what does it tell you about the type of doctor you want to be, because those are important components to write down for your application. And they are important components for you to then write down for or be able to talk about during your interview. So definitely write down all of the meaningful components in your life. And then I think I don't need to talk much about the strong academic and activities and life experiences, because that's something that you have to do for medical MD only programs. But for the activities part, the one thing I'll emphasize is don't just do the cookie cutter, oh, I shadowed and then I volunteered. You have to do those. But on top of that, pick that one thing you're passionate about. If like for me, it's medical education or just education in general. I did a lot of work during that, whether it came to my volunteering activities, whether it came to where I was involved philanthropically. So you just want to show that there's something that you're passionate about and that you've shown that you can work towards it. And you can integrate that from high school, undergrad, throughout. So they know what unique flavor you personally are going to bring when you step into the medical school. So think about the wow factor for you and commit to doing those. So going forward, I put together some tips and tricks for you guys, and I'll actually send these out. I think if I send you the slides, Ahmad, would you be able to send it out to everyone?
Yes, I'll do that.
Awesome. So these are more things that you can look at. And if you have more questions, you can ask me about them. But these are more specifics for people that are committed to applying to MD PhD. And I have some helpful links here as well. And then when you go through them, please reach out if there's any questions about them. I didn't want to spend too much time on those here in case a big group of the audience doesn't want to do MD PhD. But those slides are available for you, and I can send those out. So I see some questions in the chat. Yes, I can put those programs in the chat, and I can actually maybe make a slide with those links when these slides go out to you, Ahmad, and you can send it out so they can look at those programs directly. What should I apply for medical school? I'm an international student. Should I do all of those things? I don't know if I fully understand your question. If you're an international student, should I do all of those things? I think regardless of whether you're an international student, it's important for you to consider your holistic application and kind of try and meet the requirements of what they're looking for in MD PhD, right? And I think it's not just about impressing an admissions committee, but it's also the type of person that they want going into an MD PhD, right? So if you are an MD PhD student, in the future as a physician scientist, you still continue to portray all of these values in as part of your career. So I think it's about you understanding if you like doing all of these things. And if you do, then you'll be very happy in an MD PhD programs. For programs regarding which visas to get a green card, can I ask the mentors? You can ask the mentors and F1 doctors, but we are mostly all volunteer medical students. So we are only able to give advice based on what we personally went through. We, at this point, do not have lawyers or people that can help directly with which visas would be right for you. And we're not experts on that. So I would just make sure that you're coming to us for questions about, hey, like if I'm applying to medical school, what visa am I going to be on? That's an F1, right? Like we can help you with that. But if it's a more complicated visa question, unfortunately, we don't have the expertise at this moment. How do you get clinical volunteering hours during undergrad hours? Oh, so most hospitals actually have a volunteer program. So I volunteered here at the Frederick Hospital when I was actually in high school. And then in undergrad, I volunteered at the UW-Madison Associated Hospital. So almost all academic hospitals have a volunteering site that you can look at. The other options, always nursing homes usually have volunteer hours that have more patient involvement. Free clinics in your area might have some volunteering opportunities for you. I'm trying to think. Do clinical experiences? Yes, absolutely. The one thing I do want to be cautious about is there is a lot more awareness of students doing maybe things more than they're trained for in the US when they do like mission trips to outside the country. So just make sure that you are in a good program if you choose to do your clinical programs outside. So as long as you're not doing anything that you wouldn't do in the US in a different country and there's no ethical issues there, absolutely, clinical experiences outside count. Do you have any mentor that if you're studying medicine in Canada? If you go on our site, you can actually look for people from different countries. So in the search box on the mentor site, type Canada and see if you can find someone from there. If not, shoot me a personal email. I actually have a friend at the medical college who is from Canada, so I'm happy to connect you with him. He's not an official mentor on F1 Doctors, but if you're not able to find someone on F1 Doctors, shoot me an email. And here, let me put my contact information slide back up. Thank you for your kind messages. What could we do instead if there are no volunteering in our country? So I think at the end of the day, what programs care about is commitment to giving back to society and commitment to improving health. And you can get creative with that, right? So if your country doesn't have any volunteering officially involved, there's absolutely no harm with you saying, hey, local school, can I come help teach for a little bit? Can I come mentor or tutor students? I can teach science, I can teach biology, right? So you can get creative with how you give back to the community. And my Google Home thinks I'm talking to it. But yeah, so I think you can always find opportunities, even if it's not an official volunteering program. The other thing to look into, United Way, I think, is a more global community and a more global organization. So you can look at those for opportunities for volunteering. And then there's other things like, oh my God, I'm blanking on it. The national organization that's very involved with helping kids, UNICEF. So there are other international groups that you can volunteer with, even if they're not directly in your local country. So I would look into those. As a high schooler, honestly, the best thing you can do now is, one, if you're interested in research and things like that, a lot of medical schools in the area are actually taking on high schoolers. Like, I know MCW has a program for that. So you can look up high school involvement opportunities, shadow as much as you physically can, because you really want to convince them that you've explored medicine and you understand it. And then for volunteering, I think as a high schooler, we just care that you're committed to giving back to society. So if there's anything you're passionate about, you want to work on food insecurity, you want to work on homelessness, and this applies to even medical students, right? Like or undergrad students, you don't only have to do direct patient volunteering. If you have plenty of clinical hours to prove that you like medicine, go volunteer in areas that are unique to what you care about and you think you can really make an impact with. So you can choose any social issue you care about and volunteer there, because the passion that you show towards that social issue will really shine when you're talking in an interview. We just care that you want to do good for the society. It doesn't have to always be directly with patients and medicine. My engineering degree, I think definitely engineering pushed me more towards research, because I think part of what I loved about engineering was having more creative freedom. And that might have been even more unique to biomedical engineering, because we're groomed to be the idea people, right? So biomedical engineering a lot of time trains you to come up with new ideas and to prototype, versus some of the other engineering components are more about the nitty gritty, the how to make the most efficient something, right? And that's not exactly what biomedical engineering is. So I think falling in love with that aspect of biomedical engineering definitely made me want to do research. So I have to admit, I'm not too familiar with how you can apply for postgraduate programs in the US. But that being said, if you're interested in research, a lot of postdoctoral fellowship or postdoctoral training opportunities take on international students almost throughout the country. A lot of postdocs are international students here. So I would recommend going to institution websites that you're interested in and looking at opportunities that they post for postdoctoral research, if that's what you're interested in. And then we do have post-baccalaureate programs in the US where you can officially take courses and study. If you are interested in that, I would recommend looking for a mentor on F1 doctors that's done that before. I personally did not take any gap years, so I'm not aware of how to do the post-bac component. That's a very unique situation. If we have mentors who are of similar backgrounds, you can absolutely reach out to them. But if not, I think regardless of whether they have the same background or the country you're from, if you have specific questions about how do I apply to medical school, how can I improve my application, what do you think this research opportunity is a good one to consider, why or why not, any of those things, F1 doctors, regardless of their background, will be able to help you with. But if you're particularly interested in the immigration aspect of it, unfortunately, we don't have the expertise for that, considering we don't have lawyers on our site. Awesome. I think that was all the questions I see in the chat. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
All right. I think, did anyone have any more questions? Ms. Gupika today? All right, Anna. So now we usually at the end of our sessions, we give a big round of applause through Zoom to our guest speaker to thank them for coming and sharing the experiences today. So we do thank you. Also in the chat, we are going to leave a guest speaker form where you can thank Ms. Kapika for coming today. And we will send that to you, Ms. Kapika, to have that as a memorable item. So
Absolutely.
I'm gonna leave that down in the chat today. All right.
Great.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate it, and we learned a lot. So it means a lot.
I'm so glad.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
It was great seeing you all, and I will post I will email you the PowerPoint slides, and I'll have links to all the different undergraduate programs on the slide.
Of course. Yeah, and then we'll leave it. I'll put it in the Google Drive for everyone to have access to. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Everyone. Bye. All righty, guys. We are going to transition over to our workshop today. So I'm going to put that on a slide for you guys now. Again, all of our sessions are going to be recorded on our itinerary, as well as shared onto our Google Drive. So if you have any questions, please let me know, and then we can go on from there. But we'll begin the workshop today. So if everyone can see the slideshow, we are going to take a deep dive into the cardiovascular and integumentary systems. So these are two major systems, and we're going to kind of take a deep dive into them. We're going to spend more time focused kind of towards our cardiovascular system, just because that's the most complex, and it's one of the most important ones to memorize early on because it will always show up the steps of the blood flow and stuff. So we will begin now. Again, have questions, leave them in the chat, or you can ask me on Slack. I'm always here for you. Okay, so the integumentary system. Oh, make sure I have access to the chat. Okay. So again, if you don't know, basically the integumentary system is basically composed of our skin, and it is the body's outer layer and the largest sense receptor. If we didn't have the integumentary system, we would be completely dehydrated. Bacteria would be able to enter our bodies instantly. So it is this barrier between the internal and external environment to maintain homeostasis. And again, the major purposes of the integumentary system have to do with protecting our body, regulating our body temperature, and excreting the waste products via sweat. I'm gonna ask one question for you guys to put in the chat. What is the largest organ in the human body? Skin. I see the right answer. See, that was a question that tricked me up on my sophomore year in high school at a little test. And that question right there, it was bad. I did not know that the skin was a large organ. It just didn't make sense to me, but I'm letting you guys know that it is. Skin is the largest organ in the body, it doesn't seem like an organ, but it is an organ. So it is pretty fascinating. So it is the largest one. So the main structure of the integumentary system consists of our skin, and some of the accessory kind of organs in the integumentary system are the hair, the nails, sweat, and oil glands as well. So cutaneous membrane, you might hear that word going around when you take more advanced anatomy and physiology courses. What does that mean? Does anyone know what that pretty much stands for? Top of the skin, correct. Pretty much, I see the answer in the chat is skin. Cutaneous membrane is pretty much the skin, and it's kind of the toppest layer, or skin. So again, skin is the largest and heaviest organ in the human body. Just again, I want you guys to know cutaneous membrane is another word for skin. So they can be used interchangeably, and you'll hear that when you take more advanced anatomy and physiology classes. And the skin also receives more than a third of our body's blood supply. It's composed of three main layers, right? Called the dermis, the hypodermis, and the most layer. It's called epidermis is the top layer. It's epi above, dermis, and then hypodermis. Those are the three layers of the dermis. And we'll go and take a deep dive into them in a few minutes too. But that is the main layer of our skin. That's what it consists of. Again, the skin synthesizes vitamin D and maintains balance of fluids as well as regulating body temperature. So those are some major functions of the skin. Now, to kind of take an overview, we have the epidermis. Again, this is the top layer of skin, and this is composed of stratified squamous epithelial tissue. So that's the mouthful. So that's the main tissue it's consisted of, and it's important to know it because that is, again, what's the tissue is actually called, and there's different tissues for each layer. The cell that it contains are keratinocytes, melanocytes, Langerhans, and Merkel cells. The Merkel cells are kind of the tetraceptors, and that's what you kind of feel. And then the rest are like keratin, melanin, as well as immune cells. So yeah, that's kind of a even further dive to this epidermis. So again, it can be composed into even sublayers, and they can be very certain and very specific. So after the epidermis, the more deep layer, okay, the more deeper layer is called the dermis. And this is kind of the strong, flexible, kind of connective tissue layer of the human skin. And it's important to know that this is consists of like mast cells, white blood cells, macrophages, and fibroblasts. And then the even more deepest layer, one of the main things you're going to need to know in anatomy and physiology is what's called directional terms. So if I say something is deep, that means I'm going deeper. If I'm saying superficial, that means leading even like superficial is towards the outer skin of the body. Deeper is more in. So for instance, the epidermis is superficial compared to like the hypodermis and dermis, but the dermis, if I was saying the the hypodermis is the most deepest layer of the skin. So those are just, and it's called, we'll get into it a little bit later, but that's just really relating to directional terms that are important to know. And the very bottom layer is pretty much consists of adipose or connective tissue, and this is the blanket of fat. And this, again, it consists of adipocytes. This is kind of fat tissue, as well as fibroblasts and macrophages. So that is important to know. And again, your skin consists of a lot of receptors. There are veins and arteries. There are like sebaceous glands. Those are the sweat glands. So yeah, we can go much more deep into this, but this is kind of just an overview to understand kind of what the integumentary system consists of. And if I want you guys to get one thing out of this workshop, is to know what the cells are in each. So epidermis is started by squamous, dermis is connective tissue, and the hypodermis is kind of that fatty layer of the skin. Leave questions down in a chat, as well as if we can't get to them today, we'll get to them in the Slack channel. So you can ask them there as well. So now cardiovascular system. Again, that was a brief introduction to the integumentary system. We can spend much more time into it, but because of the time we have, we are able only to do like an overview, but the cardiovascular system, we're going to go into it pretty deep. So cardiovascular system, pretty much also referred to as the circulatory system, right? The cardiovascular system's main function is getting the necessary oxygen and nutrients to all parts of the body and ridding your body of any waste. Every part of your body needs oxygen to work, okay? And the main kind of organs or main like accessory organs, as well as main terms you'll hear around the cardiovascular system will be like blood vessels in the heart, and blood vessels will get into arteries and veins in a few minutes. But if I were to ask you a pulmonary circuit or a systemic circuit, does anyone know the difference? I'll spend like 2 minutes. Good. I think I'm starting to see pulmonary, lung to heart, and then systemic. Rest of the body, correct. Okay, so it's important to know there's two kind of circuits for the cardiovascular system. One is blood flow between the heart and the lungs, and this is where blood gets oxygenated, and the systemic is when it comes back and then goes to the rest of the body. So I'll show you a circuit in a second, but that is the main circuits in the cardiovascular system. This is where a lot of students can get tripped up on, because we'll get into in a second, because I don't want to confuse you. But just right now, the main aspects I need you guys to understand is pulmonary has to do with blood flow being from the heart to the lungs, and then systemic is the heart to the rest of the body. So you'll see like a diagram like this when you're studying circuits, because it'll show you kind of what's going on here. The pulmonary circuit is when deoxygenated blood leaves, get oxygenated, come back to the pulmonary, what's called arteries. And then you have your other circuit that goes and oxygenates the whole body, the rest of the body, and coming up to the superior inferior vena cava. So we'll get into the logistical, very specific points in a few minutes. But that is what you need to know. So yeah, we'll do there. So you also will see the cardiovascular system and respiratory system kind of interchangeably. It's not interchangeably, but they're two separate systems, but the respiratory system is kind of involved in the cardiovascular system. So it can get kind of a little confusing, but the respiratory system moves the gases in and out of the blood. So it's where the gas exchange occurs. And this happens in the lung, correct? It happens in the specific part called the alveoli. The circulatory system kind of moves the blood to all parts of the body. So it moves this oxygenated blood, as well as bringing the deoxygenated blood to the heart as well. And the respiratory system is pretty much responsible for the process of ventilation, which is the movement of air in and out of the lung. So when you inspire, you are breathing in oxygen. When you expire, you are breathing out air. So you're breathing out CO2. So this is our area of study today. You might be like, oh my God, I've never seen this before. Or if I've seen this before, I've never got into it this deep. But we're going to try and overview this and understand pretty much the whole diagram. If you break it down, it makes a lot of sense. So we'll spend some time today. This is why I wanted to spend our majority of our focus, because any anatomy and physiology class you ever take in high school, college will make you write the whole process down, the process of blood flow as well as the layers. So it's really important that you understand and get a grasp of this now, because it will make life so much easier. I remember staying up like trying to memorize this a night before a test, and it didn't really go well. So you guys can't, it's a logical aspect to it, but you really need to understand kind of how the flow of blood works. And there are a few tricky elements to it, but we'll debrief those today. So layers of the heart. The heart is composed of muscles, but there's just not one muscle. There's 3 or 4 different layers, 3 layers and one sac. So the sac that surrounds the heart is known as the pericardium. This is the fluid-based sac that surrounds your heart, and this is the most towards the surface of the heart. So it's the most superficial. And the 3 main layers are the epicardium, which is the most outer layer of the heart, the myocardium, which is the middle layer of the heart, and the endocardium, which is kind of the most inner layer or the most deepest layer in the heart. Okay, so when talking about blood flow, it's important to know that the heart is divided into 2 sides, and there is a division that is between the 2 ventricles, the right and left ventricle. And this division occurs based on the septum. You'll hear the heart is divided by the septum. So the heart is shown in anatomical position. If you look at this heart right now, this image, it's not your correct right and left, correct? The right you see on here is the opposite of your right, and the left you see on here is the opposite of your left, if that makes sense. So you're always seeing to like a doctor's patient kind of perspective. And we'll go into anatomical position in a few minutes, but it's important to know that your right and left is kind of switched. And this is where a lot of students get confused and put the wrong labeling. So they'll put left here because it kind of looks like your left, but it's not. In anatomical position, the opposite side is the right. So it can get a little confusing, and if you're still confused, we can take it even further and I can explain it. So if you need help with that, please let us know and we can take care of you. We can take care of that. So the upper layer of the heart are known as the atrium, correct? You'll see that right here. These are the atrium, and the lower ventricles, lower layers of the heart are known as ventricles. How I memorized it is A comes before V, correct, in the alphabet. So A is on top, V is on bottom. I don't know if that's going to help anyone, but that's how I kind of got the flow to that. So we're going to now talk about the detailed blood flow. What's happening? Okay, so the blood, venous blood enters, or venous blood enters the right atrium, right? So there's the superior, this is the superior vena cava, and this is the inferior vena cava. And deoxygenated venous blood will enter and collect right over here. So you'll have blood coming from all parts of the body that's deoxygenated, correct? You'll have this deoxygenated blood coming through, and it will enter and collect over here, okay? And it's important to know what a vein is. So a vein carries deoxygenated blood to the heart, correct? And arteries carry oxygenated blood away from the heart to the rest of the body. It can get a little confusing over here just because like the way that the from the right ventricle to the lungs, it's kind of opposite, but we'll get into that in a second. But again, it's important to know that veins carry the deoxygenated blood to the heart, and then arteries are the ones that are carrying the oxygenated blood. Okay, so from the right atrium to the right ventricle, the right atrium kind of takes through the right atrium, and through the tricuspid valve, blood will flow into. So this is the tricuspid valve, and this is an important valve to know. And from here, the deoxygenated blood travels to the lungs via pulmonary arteries. So I told you just a second ago that arteries carry oxygenated blood, right? But here it's flipped. So here, pulmonary artery is actually carrying deoxygenated blood. Sorry about that. I had a weird connection issue. Okay, so pretty much right ventricle will receive blood from the right atrium through a valve known as a tricuspid valve. So that is pretty important to know. So again, from here, the deoxygenated blood travels to the lungs via the pulmonary arteries, correct? And notice here again, the arteries are these are the only arteries that are carrying deoxygenated blood. So that again is where most students will get confused. So it's important to know that. Then the blood will then the left atrium, right? Once from the pulmonary artery, right? The deoxygenated blood is taken to the lungs. Now from the lungs via this part right here, correct? These are called veins. So again, these are carrying oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left atrium, collecting right over here. Again, I want you to make sure you are realizing arteries and veins for the rest of the body. Arteries are going to carry, like I said over here, arteries are going to carry oxygenated blood, and veins are going to carry deoxygenated blood. But for the heart, the arteries are the one that's going to carry the deoxygenated blood, right? But then the veins are going to carry the oxygenated blood, and it will collect in the left atrium. So it's a little confusing right over here, and that's where most students can get tripped up, but that's just important to realize. So once oxygenated blood returns, collects in the left ventral atrium, right? This is where the blood is oxygenated, right? It will go down something called a bicuspid / mitral valve. Okay, and from here, the blood is going to go to the aortic valve, this valve over here. So it's going to collect here, it's going to go up here, correct, the aortic valve, and then to the aorta, to the rest of the body. So always remember to know that valves flow one way. Valves always flow only one way, correct? So if you get confused, these are semilunar valves, correct? But they will always flow in one direction, and this prevents backflow. So again, blood flow, let's review. So blood enters the right atrium, correct, from the superior and inferior vena cava. It flows down one of the valves, and this is what's it called? It flows down the valve, the tricuspid valve, into the right ventricle, and then it's going to go to the pulmonary artery away from the heart to the lungs to get oxygenated. It's going to go then come back from the lungs from the pulmonary vein, and this is carrying the oxygenated blood this time to the left part of the heart, correct, the left atrium. And once it goes to the left atrium, it's going to go down the bicuspid / mitral valve to the left ventricle, go past the aortic valve to the aorta to the rest of the body. This picture here can get pretty confusing, but that's kind of the main flow of the heart, and this kind of summarizes the whole thing. We have slides again if you need to review this, but knowing that again, and the most important information, we'll do it in a second, but we're going to have a little competition to see, we'll do it in a second. But again, that's the flow of blood through the heart. And again, there's a lot of specific elements to know, but it is important that you just understand the flow and this kind of the switch between the arteries and the veins going on there. Another important thing to know is that the electrical currents in the heart and contractions of the heart are kind of coordinated by a sinoatrial node, which is up here, which is the natural pacemaker of the heart. And when the SA node contracts, correct, it generates nerve impulses that travel through the heart while causing the atria to contract. So we're not going to go into like Purkinje fibers and all those specific details, but just know that the SA is kind of your natural pacemaker of the heart, the natural electrical system. And this kind of controls, like, based on if you're exercising, how fast your heart is beating, etc. Okay, so this is what we're going to do now. We're going to have a little interactive, right? Using the chat, I want you guys to outline the flow of blood through the heart. You might not have this perfect right now, but try your best to do it without using your notes when I say start, correct? And I'll give you it'll take about 3 to 4 minutes, but the goal is whoever gets it first in one like chat, in one text message, the whole process will receive a Instagram shout out on our Instagram page as well as our Slack page, on our Slack channel. So I'm gonna mute my mic here and let you guys get started. And if you guys need help or are still a little confused, leave the questions down the chat, but we'll start now. Okay, I think we have a winner here. Kalaya, I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing your name right, but I think we're the first to get it. I see everyone doing an amazing job, really getting these points down. You guys are doing such a great job. This is correct. So you did a good job. It enters the vena cava, the right atrium, the right ventricle, pulmonary artery away, carries deoxygenated blood to the lungs, and then pulmonary vein is going to enter the left atrium and then collect down to the left ventricle aorta all over the body. I think all of you guys are doing such an amazing job. But again, make sure you guys also know the valves as well, because those can get mixed up to tricuspid, bicuspid, mitral. So bicuspid is also something I'd want to show you guys. But oh my God, you guys are doing an amazing job. This is perfect. You guys know y'all's heart flow. But again, just going back to this picture, because this can get confusing if I'm trying to explain something, but this is known right over here, correct? This is known as your tricuspid valve, right? But this has two names based on maybe the professor that you take, but I think mitral is the more known one, but this could also be called the bicuspid valve. So bicuspid / mitral valve, I know both of them just in case I ever get confused with one of the terms. And then this is the aortic valve. This is the pulmonary valve. So this is leading to the pulmonary artery away from the heart, correct? And that is what is going on here. Again, that is so confusing, and you probably hear me mix it up all the time. But again, pulmonary arteries usually are carrying oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. But in the heart, right, pulmonary arteries are carrying deoxygenated blood away from the heart to the lungs, and then oxygenated blood. The veins are oxygenated. So that is, it can trip you up. So it's important to know, you can kind of know what's going on. And that's why the circuits can help you kind of look into this more further and, pinpoint the fine details. Okay, so you guys are doing a really good job here, but we will move on. If you guys have questions about the heart, again, we went through it in 15 minutes, and we have so much we could cover. We could have covered so much, but due to the sake of time, we are not able to. But please leave them in the chat, as well as we can take them to Slack if you have even more specific questions, and we'll get your answers. We'll get your questions answered. Okay, now anatomical position. This is just a quick review. If you guys do not know who got it right, we got the first person to kind of outline it correctly was Kalaya Henyo. But guys, all of you guys were doing such a good job here, and you guys all just received shout outs, and everyone that's participated in this challenge today, really appreciate it. And you definitely are doing an amazing job. So we appreciate it a lot for you being active and active participant. So you might also hear when you take an anatomy class, anatomical position. So an anatomical position is kind of the standard posture of the human body, correct? So the atrial, and it's kind of showing the anterior or ventral view of the body, correct? Is the anterior to the front side. If I was talking about the back of the body, that could be called posterior slash dorsal view of the body, correct? But the anatomical position is going to be the anterior. Ventral and dorsal, they're not, I think, mainly used in animal anatomy, but anterior and posterior are used for human anatomy. So that's good to know. And again, for anatomical position, your legs are going to be slightly apart and your feet and palm are going to be forward. And again, your right and left are opposite from what you think your right and left are. So like if I'm like looking at my screen right now and I see, okay, this is right and left, my right and left is the opposite, but because an anatomical position is flipped. So that can also be confusing for students. And this explains why the heart has the right and left, the opposite of what you would think, because again, we're looking at the heart diagram in anatomical position. All right, so some directional terms that are probably important to know is medial, lateral, proximal, distal, superior, inferior, and then anterior, posterior. Those are like a lot of terms I'm just spitting at right now, but pretty much let's go to it for let's deep dive into it. So superior means towards the upper part of the body, inferior means toward the lower part of the body. So if you hear someone saying the heart is superior to the diaphragm, it's because the heart is above. It's superior, it's above. The legs are anything towards the bottom of your feet, towards the bottom of your legs are going to be inferior. So those are one of the most anterior, posterior, superior, inferior are the more pretty important terms to know. And then medial and lateral. Medial pretty much means toward the midline of the body, and lateral pretty much means away. So towards the opposite side, not the medial. So towards your hands, farther away. And then proximal and distal. Proximal is towards the point of attachment, and distal is away from the point of attachment. So for your arm right here, if you see this is going to be my point of attachment, correct? For my arm. This if I was talking about an anatomical position like a muscle or something, correct? My hand and my upper arm, correct? I can talk about proximal being towards the point of attachment and distal being away from the point of attachment. So those are the most important medical terms I feel like, or directional terms I think you guys really need to know, and it will help you a lot in your anatomy and physiology courses whenever you take it, standard level as well as higher level. So again, proximal is towards the point of attachment. Distal is away from this point of attachment, correct? Then medial and lateral. So medial is going to be the middle of the line. So in the middle, correct? It's going to be towards the midline of the body. And lateral is going to be everything away from the middle of the body. And superior, inferior, superior is going to be the most above, the highest portion, or the most, upper portion of the body, compared to the inferior portion, was going to be the lowest part of the body. And then again, anterior and posterior. Anterior is going to be the most forward part of your body. So if I was able to divide the body in half, correct? So if I'm looking at the body this way, the opposite hemisphere is what's going to be the posterior section. This was a lot of information today. So if you guys were able to understand everything, proud of you. You're doing an amazing job. But if there's still some misconceptions or there's still some confusion going on from the heart, the skin, or this position here, please let us know. We will answer those questions. We'll answer those questions for you. But does anyone have any questions for this workshop? I know we spent a lot of time on cardiovascular system, but you guys, again, are doing an amazing job talking about the flow of blood to the heart. And if you haven't ever studied that before, yeah, it's confusing, I know, but I believe in you, and with a little more practice and a little more connecting those ideas, you're gonna get it you'll get it really easily. All right, does anyone have any questions today? Okay, then. Alrighty. Okay. So if you guys don't have any questions for today, we'll stick around for a little bit longer. If you guys have any questions for the program and stuff, again, this is our 5th session and Monday is going to be our last. And we know some students are going to be celebrating Eid tomorrow or today. So Eid Mubarak to everyone who's celebrating. And I think Davina's here and she's going to end off the session for today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ahmad, for doing an amazing job running the session today. Just a couple quick reminders. We have our week 1 homework in our Notion, and we're also going to be taking a group picture on Monday during your session. So please, if you're comfortable, turn your cameras on so we can take a group picture of everyone, and then those pictures will all be emailed out to you as well, just so we have some memories for the program. And it's also a great opportunity for us to see all of your beautiful faces. But yes, please fill out the week 1 homework. We'll see you all on Monday. Excellent job, Ahmad, with the workshop and for running the session today. And we'll see you all then. But for right now, goodbye, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend.